The palace service had reached its most solemn moment when Prince William received a silent signal and stepped into the central royal position. Every movement had been rehearsed, every place carefully assigned, except for what happened next. Prince Harry stared toward his brother, lowered his service program, and walked out before the prayers had ended, turning a carefully controlled ceremony into a public family fracture no curtain could conceal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the tension before anyone dared react. Around him sat Queen Camilla, Catherine, senior courtiers, and invited representatives from the armed forces, gathered for a palace remembrance service honoring sacrifice and national duty. The final royal observance, the closing act in which senior family members stand in their assigned ceremonial places, was meant to show unity beside the crown. Instead, it exposed a wound the family had failed to contain. Harry had entered with controlled stillness, determined not to give the room reason to judge him. Yet the instant William was directed to stand beside the king, that discipline cracked. The center position had once carried the idea of two sons sharing responsibility around their father. Now one brother stood within the line of succession, while the other remained behind, reduced to watching a symbol of shared duty become a declaration of distance. William felt the movement before he saw it. He turned to catch Harry leaving his assigned place, walking down the aisle, and passing through the chapel doors before the prayers ended. Pain flashed across the prince's face, but he did not move. Abandoning the central position would have disrupted the service, embarrassed Charles, and turned one act of protest into complete ceremonial collapse. Catherine noticed what others missed. Inside William's program was a folded seating amendment, meaning a last-minute change to where each royal would stand. The document showed that the center position decision had been approved only hours earlier. Beneath it rested a handwritten note bearing Harry's name and two chilling words: "Final arrangement." Camilla watched the king grip the edge of his chair as the doors closed. He did not look surprised. He looked burdened, as though the walkout had confirmed a consequence feared before the family entered the chapel. Charles understood that this was not a sudden burst of anger. Something had been decided, something had been withheld, and Harry's departure was the first public sign of a private rupture already in motion. Harry's footsteps had vanished beyond the chapel, but the pain behind them could only be understood by examining what that central position meant to both brothers. To the watching congregation, William had moved only a few feet. To Harry, those steps crossed years of shared grief, rivalry, loyalty, and abandonment. The center position was not simply better placement during a royal service. It placed one brother visibly beside the crown, while leaving the other behind, forcing both men to confront a truth they had spent years avoiding. Their lives were no longer moving in the same direction. Harry stopped in the corridor but could not bring himself to leave the palace. Humiliation pressed against grief as the meaning of the service settled inside him. William's life had always been tied to succession, the formal order deciding who inherits the crown, and that role demanded discipline even when family bonds were breaking. His own path had become something else entirely: distance, unresolved anger, and repeated attempts to build an independent life without fully escaping the institution that shaped him. William remained beside Charles, yet his focus had already fractured. The prince heard the prayers, followed the required movements, and kept his expression controlled, but his mind returned to earlier ceremonies when he and Harry had stood shoulder to shoulder after losing their mother. Back then, duty had felt like something they carried together. Now the same duty had placed one brother near the monarch and pushed the other toward the door. Catherine watched the empty chair before quietly turning to an equerry, a senior royal aide responsible for helping ceremonies run according to plan. She asked when the arrangement had changed. His answer came carefully. William had not requested the center position, and the instruction had arrived only hours before the service. The future king had stepped forward because he had been ordered to, not because he had chosen to replace his brother. Camilla did not study Harry's abandoned place. She watched Charles. The queen consort saw the king's jaw tighten and understood that his silence carried more weight than the empty chair. He had not reacted like a father surprised by his son's departure. He had reacted like a monarch watching the consequence of a decision he already knew could break the family apart. Harry reached inside his coat and removed an old family insignia, a small symbol once worn to mark his connection to royal service. He closed his hand around it, as memories of shared duty collided with the reality he had just witnessed. The object had once represented belonging. Now it felt like proof of a place that still existed in memory, but no longer existed in practice. William finally looked toward the closed doors, knowing his brother had not simply rejected a ceremony. Harry had rejected what the position seemed to declare about them both. Harry lifted his head, called for an aide, and asked to speak to his father alone. Yet the true cause of the walkout had begun long before the service, during one private rehearsal that transformed tension into an irreversible decision. 3 nights before the service, the chapel had been almost empty when a rehearsal exposed the conflict no public statement had acknowledged. Harry arrived expecting to stand beside William during the final observance, exactly as an earlier ceremonial plan had shown. But when a senior official moved his marker away from the king, the Duke demanded an explanation and received an answer that made the coming walkout feel almost inevitable. Harry had studied the original service plan before entering. It placed him on one side of Charles and William on the other, creating a brief image of 2 sons united around their father during the final act of remembrance. The ceremonial plan was the official guide, showing where each royal would stand and move. It did not restore their old bond, but it offered something powerful: public proof that distance had not completely erased Harry's place beside his family. Charles entered, knowing the rehearsal involved more than timing. The session had been arranged to settle movement, security, and the order of the final observance. Yet every position also carried a message about trust and responsibility. Senior family members were seeing the full arrangement for the first time. What looked like a simple floor marker could decide who appeared close to the crown and who remained outside its inner line. The king gave the instruction without anger. He turned to the Lord Chamberlain, the senior household official responsible for organizing major royal ceremonies, and ordered Harry's marker removed. William's position was then shifted into the center beside him. The sound of the marker being lifted ended any illusion that the earlier plan still mattered. Harry stepped forward before the official could move away. He told his father he had returned to perform family duty, not to be displayed like a guest standing at the edge of his own history. His restraint made the accusation sharper. He had accepted distance, criticism, and reduced responsibility. But this change felt different. It transformed private tension into a public ranking. Charles answered with controlled sadness. He told his younger son that affection could not decide ceremonial responsibility, and that the service had to reflect the monarchy as it now stood. The king's words were calm, but they cut deeply. Harry heard the distinction clearly. He could still be loved as a son, while no longer being trusted to stand beside the crown. William entered moments later and saw the missing marker. The prince looked toward the door Harry had approached, ready to follow, but his father stopped him. Charles insisted that the decision had been made and would not be negotiated through another argument between brothers. Harry turned back once. His final warning was quiet, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. If William took that position in public, then the family would also have to accept his response in public. That warning returned with devastating force after the service, when the brothers finally faced one another without prayers, music, or ceremony to contain them. William found Harry beside a closed courtyard entrance, waiting with the stillness of someone who had already made a decision. No cameras stood between them. No advisor spoke first. The future king asked why his brother had turned a sacred service into a public spectacle, But Harry's answer cut deeper than anger. He had walked out because remaining seated would have meant silently accepting that he no longer belonged. William had left the post-service reception the moment an aide confirmed that Harry was still inside the palace grounds. The reception was the formal gathering held after the ceremony, where senior guests were expected to speak calmly and preserve the appearance of order. Yet calm had already become impossible. Explanations would soon spread through the household, and the prince knew that if he did not speak to his brother now, courtiers would begin speaking for both of them. Harry stood in the private passage with his jaw tight. The narrow route had once allowed senior royals to move between ceremonial rooms without crossing public spaces. But now it trapped the brothers inside a conflict they could no longer avoid. He accused William of benefiting from every decision that pushed him farther away. Each time the palace reduced his role, the future king appeared stronger. Each time Harry protested, he was blamed for damaging the family. William rejected the accusation immediately. He insisted that he had not designed the arrangement, requested the center position, or even known the final order had been approved. The prince said he had stepped forward because Charles had commanded it, and refusing in front of the congregation would have humiliated the king. Duty had forced him into the center. It had not protected him from the pain of seeing his brother leave. Harry pulled the earlier service plan from inside his coat and placed it between them. The document proved that he had originally been positioned close to Charles, and that the change came only after the private rehearsal. This had not been routine planning. Someone had deliberately redrawn the family around the crown. William stared at the page and admitted the truth he had held back. Charles had ordered him not to challenge the final arrangement. The king had warned that any resistance would weaken the ceremony and make the family appear divided before it even began. The brothers had been placed on opposite sides of a decision neither of them fully controlled. Harry's anger gave way to something heavier. He told William that watching him take the center felt like being erased in real time. The prince answered that watching Harry walk away felt like losing him all over again. A voice ended the confrontation. Charles stood at the far end of the passage, his expression controlled but wounded. He looked from one son to the other and ordered them both into his private room. The brothers had spoken with anger, but inside the king's room, they would discover whose authority had truly reshaped the ceremony, and why. King Charles did not raise his voice when his sons entered. He placed the final service order on the table, removed his glasses, and allowed the silence to expose what anger had hidden. William had not taken the center because he demanded it, and Harry had not been moved because affection had disappeared. The decision came from the king himself, and he was prepared to explain the painful reasoning behind it. Charles kept one hand near the document, as though even touching it carried a cost. The final service order was the approved plan controlling where each royal stood, and what responsibility each person carried during the ceremony. Officials had moved the markers and protected the arrangement from public argument, but the authority behind those changes belonged to the monarch. No courtier had forced his hand. No advisor could be blamed. William looked down while his father explained the center position. It identified the person expected to assume immediate ceremonial responsibility if the king became unable to finish the observance. The role was not a prize or a public reward. It was a safeguard, and because the prince remained the active heir beside the crown, the responsibility had fallen to him alone. Charles struggled when he turned toward Harry. His voice remained controlled, but sorrow broke through each careful sentence. He said the arrangement reflected present royal duty, not the value of one son over another. The king still loved him, yet love could not replace the formal responsibility William carried, especially when one unexpected moment might demand immediate action. Harry refused to let the distinction pass without challenge. He told his father that the monarchy always separated institutional decisions from personal rejection, then expected the person pushed aside to feel nothing. The Duke could understand the language of duty, but he could not ignore its human cost. Every reduction was called procedure. Every wound was treated as misunderstanding. Charles finally disclosed what he had hidden. A documented medical account prepared after the rehearsal recorded a brief episode of weakness during the final preparations. For several seconds, the king had been unsure whether he could continue standing. That moment forced him to choose one person capable of completing the observance without confusion, delay, or public panic. William raised his head in shock. Harry went still. The monarch admitted he had kept the concern from his younger son because he feared private information would become trapped inside the brothers' mistrust. He believed Harry might see the health issue as another excuse for exclusion, while William might feel pressured to defend a decision he had not made. William then noticed a second document beneath the service order. It was sealed, dated that morning, and authorized immediate consequences if any royal abandoned the observance before its formal conclusion. Harry stared at the seal as the meaning settled between them. The center position had been explained, but the sealed instruction meant Harry's walkout was about to produce consequences far beyond one painful family argument. Within minutes, the palace machinery began moving. Harry's empty chair was removed before guests entered the adjoining reception. The official photographs were rearranged, and aides received instructions not to discuss the departure. Yet the most devastating consequence unfolded privately when Harry was handed a revised schedule showing that his remaining ceremonial appearances had been suspended pending the king's decision. Harry took the pages inside a waiting room and read them without speaking. Every palace appearance linked to his visit had been crossed out, including the military reception and the private family gathering planned for that evening. Senior courtiers had treated his walkout as a breach of service protocol, meaning he had left a formal royal duty without first informing the household official responsible for controlling the ceremony. To the palace, that made his pain an official problem. William remained close to Charles as the response took shape. The prince understood why action had become unavoidable, even if he hated what it meant. Guests had seen Harry leave. Armed forces representatives had noticed the empty position. Allowing the moment to pass without consequence could make the king appear unable to control his own household at the exact time the service was meant to display stability. Harry set the revised schedule down slowly. He felt punished for refusing to sit silently through his own humiliation, while the family now treated his reaction as more damaging than the decision that caused it. The Duke had walked out because he believed his place had been erased. Now, every crossed-out appearance seemed to confirm that fear. Catherine discovered the deeper truth through a documented briefing prepared for senior family members. The sealed instruction had been drafted only after Harry's warning at the rehearsal. Palace officials had not merely reacted to his departure, they had prepared for it. The possibility of a walkout had been considered, written down, and attached to consequences before he ever entered the chapel. Camilla confronted Charles before the final order could be signed. The queen consort urged him not to turn one ceremonial breach into permanent separation, while anger still controlled the room. She reminded the king that discipline could protect the crown while destroying the family, and that Harry might interpret a permanent suspension as proof that reconciliation had never truly been offered. Charles listened but gave no immediate answer. The monarch knew that reversing the order too quickly could weaken his authority, yet enforcing it completely might close the door on his younger son for good. Harry reached for his phone before leaving the waiting room. He sent William one message: "Meet me alone." No father, no advisors, no security. The palace had reduced the crisis to schedules and protocol, but the brothers' next meeting would strip away every institutional excuse. Late that evening, William entered a small private sitting room and found Harry alone beside an untouched cup of tea. There were no aides, no ceremonial plans, and no father waiting to deliver a verdict. For the first time since the service, neither brother defended his position. Harry admitted why the center placement had broken his composure, and William finally confessed what standing there had cost him. Harry looked around the room before speaking. They had visited it during earlier family stays, when rank felt distant, and their bond still seemed stronger than the institutions surrounding them. That history mattered, because the conversation was no longer about one ceremony. It was about years of grief, silence, and resentment, carried by two brothers who had once believed they would face every royal burden together. William made one condition clear: nothing said in that room would be released immediately, repeated through advisors, or shaped into a public statement. The prince wanted honesty without every sentence becoming evidence in another family dispute. Harry agreed. For once, neither man would speak as a royal position. They would speak as sons. Harry admitted that seeing William move beside Charles had felt like proof that their childhood bond had finally been erased. Rank had separated them. Responsibility had hardened that distance. Years of anger had turned every palace decision into another reminder that one brother belonged at the center, while the other was expected to accept the edge. William did not deny the pain. He revealed through their private conversation that taking the position had never felt like victory. It felt like a warning. The future king had looked at his father and understood that one day he might be forced to stand where Charles could no longer stand. Success and suffering had arrived in the same step. Harry listened as his brother explained the king's weakness before the service. William had obeyed because hesitation could have exposed Charles in front of the entire congregation. The prince knew the change would wound Harry, but he also feared that refusing the position might leave their father unsupported at the worst possible moment. Harry finally accepted what anger had hidden. His walkout had been a protest against exclusion, not an attack on William. Yet the public act had trapped his brother between family loyalty and royal duty. He admitted that leaving had made the prince carry the consequences of a decision neither of them had created. The brothers rose with a proposal neither could have imagined hours earlier. Harry would accept responsibility for abandoning the service, but Charles could not use that mistake as justification for permanent exile. Their private understanding could not erase what the world had witnessed, but it gave the family one final chance to define the event before others defined it for them. By sunrise, the walkout had escaped every palace effort to contain it. One photograph dominated broadcasts and front pages: William standing beside the king beneath the ceremonial standard, while Harry's empty chair remained visible at the edge of the frame. The image transformed a private wound into a worldwide judgment, inviting millions to decide whether they had witnessed necessary succession or the final exclusion of a wounded son. William watched the footage repeat without sound. Broadcasters slowed the moment he stepped forward, then froze Harry's final glance before the chapel doors closed behind him. Every pause became evidence. Every expression was treated like a confession. The ceremonial standard, a royal banner showing the monarch's authority, stood above the brothers' divided positions and made the contrast feel even more severe. Harry read the palace statement from a private room. It confirmed that he had left before the service ended, but added that family discussions had taken place afterward. The words were restrained, yet their purpose was clear. The monarchy wanted to acknowledge the rupture without declaring permanent separation. He understood how carefully the sentence had been written, but he also knew it could not erase the image now spreading across the world. One newspaper made the symbolism impossible to escape. Its front page carried the empty chair photograph beneath the headline, "One brother steps forward, the other walks away." The picture turned William's obedience into triumph for some, and Harry's pain into rejection for others. What had begun as a family conflict was now being judged as a battle between duty and belonging. Catherine saw the front page at breakfast and lowered it with visible distress. She knew the center position had been connected to Charles's weakness, not a contest designed to humiliate his younger son. Yet the public saw only two brothers moving in opposite directions. The king's vulnerability had disappeared beneath a simpler and harsher story. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace before midday. Some praised William for remaining steady beside his father, while others placed handwritten notes near the gates, expressing sympathy for Harry's isolation. One message read, "Duty should not erase family." Another answered, "The crown cannot stop for pain." The division outside the palace reflected the conflict within it. Charles then authorized an unexpected clarification. Harry had not been expelled from future family occasions, and no permanent ban had been approved. The announcement revealed that the brothers' private proposal had changed the king's planned response. Attention turned toward the monarch's evening statement. Charles now had to decide whether the walkout would be remembered as betrayal, pain, or the first honest act of accountability. The world had delivered its competing judgments, but only Charles could give the moment its final meaning inside the monarchy. When King Charles finally addressed the family, he did not pretend the service had unfolded as intended. Harry's departure was wrong, William's position was necessary, and the pain between them was real. Yet the king refused to let one walkout become the final chapter of his son's relationship. The ceremony had exposed a divided family, but the response would determine whether that division hardened into permanent loss. Charles spoke first about the future. William's center position would remain unchanged at state ceremonies, the formal national occasions where royal placement reflects constitutional duty and readiness. The prince stood closest to the crown because he was expected to act immediately if his father could not continue. That responsibility was not a reward, and the king would not weaken it simply to soften the emotional meaning attached to it. Harry listened without interrupting. He understood that he would not regain the place he had lost, but another decision followed. Charles withdrew the automatic suspension of his younger son's future family appearances. Ceremonial rank would still define where the duke stood during official duties, yet it would no longer be used to decide whether he remained welcome within the family. Harry accepted his share of the damage. He apologized directly for leaving before the service ended, and admitted that his protest had hurt people who were not responsible for the change. Still, he refused to deny the exclusion he had felt. Walking out had been wrong, but the pain behind it had been real, and silence would only have allowed that wound to deepen. William faced his brother with equal honesty. The future king admitted that palace silence had repeatedly allowed decisions to reach Harry without explanation. He could not promise equality of role because their responsibilities were different, but he promised that future changes affecting his brother would be discussed openly whenever circumstances allowed. Duty would no longer become an excuse for avoiding difficult conversations. Charles then placed the cancelled schedule between his sons. The document represented every appearance removed after the walkout, and every consequence prepared before emotions had settled. The monarch tore it once through the center, and told them that protocol could define their positions, but it could not decide whether they continued speaking as brothers. Harry did not reclaim the center. William did not surrender his duty. Instead, both men accepted a harder truth. Equal responsibility was impossible, but mutual respect was not. The walkout became neither a victory nor a defeat. It became the painful moment when the monarchy chose continuity, while the family finally admitted what that choice had cost. William remained beside the crown. Harry walked his own path, and Charles accepted that preserving the monarchy meant confronting, not concealing, the wounds within his family. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.